All right, good morning, guys. Let's get going. If you're in the lobby, grab your stuff, come on in, find your table. Okay, I got a couple quick announcements today as we get going. First, if you notice in the email this week, we had this actually happened a couple of weeks ago, a team table issued kind of a challenge. The other tables, table 23, has decided just amongst themselves to support a kid going to camp this summer, the Royal Family Kids Camp, which is foster kids in Kane County. We've been doing this as a church for a number of years, and they decided to support a kid going to camp. And it takes $500 to do that, and they thought, they emailed me and said, can you make this a challenge, see if any other team tables want to pick this up? I said, sure. I like that sort of thinking. So table 23 is saying, offering the invitation, if you want to join them as a table, raising $500 to send a kid to camp. And if that's something your table wants to do, just let me know, and I'll put you in contact with Glenn, who runs our side of that, and we can get you connected up there. So appreciate table 23 for doing that and for issuing the challenge. Secondly, we have a first ever alternative joke ending challenge as well. Last week, the story I told was about the robot bartender, remember? Guy goes into a bar, robot bartender asks him what his drink is, and then gives it to him and says, what's your IQ? And at the first question, the guy says 160, so he talks about astrophysics or engineering or something. And then the guy comes back again, the robot bartender asks him again, he says IQ is 100, he's talking about NASCAR and LSU football and stuff. Then he comes back the third time, and the guy says IQ is 35. And then the joke that was sent to me that I had a political ending to it. I decided to change it to a sports ending, and I decided to pick on Packer fans by saying, the robot then said, so you really thought the Packers were going to make the Super Bowl? So then I offered a chance for Packer fans to offer alternative endings and said the winner would get a prize. I got 4 responses. Okay, here they are. I won't give you names until we get to the winner, at least my opinion of the winner. Okay, first response. Robot says, so you really think Ryan Pace thought Trubisky was better than Mahomes? Okay. Kind of predictable, saw that one coming, but that's the first answer. The second one I got back says, I said, what's your IQ, not how many years has it been since the Bears won the Super Bowl? That's pretty good, right? That comes from a guy who claims to be actually a Packer team owner. You know, the fans own that team, and so that comes with a little weight on it. Same guy sent in 2 responses. Here's the next one. Robot says, according to my calculations, your mother was an idiot, your father was a moron, so that would make you a Bears fan. Now, that's a little mean-spirited. Last response, and this is the one I'm nominating as winner. Robot says, that explains the Trubisky jersey. Oh, you guys didn't like that one very much. So you guys, actually, I may have to give 2 winners out. That was my winner. And I have so the winner was going to get season tickets to Bears games this year. So actually, just kidding, just a little Starbucks gift card. So the last one, that explains the Trubisky jersey. That was my choice. So Mike Wildman, come on up here. You guys could guess it's going to be Mike. Come on up. You notice how half-hearted that applause is, Mike? That's very intentional, right? Yeah. Enjoy. And the popular choice then, not my choice, the popular choice was how many years since the Bear won the Super Bowl. That's Bill Fetter. So Bill, stand up. I have a card out in my car. I'll bring it into you. I do have another card. So congratulations. And he's actually a part owner of the Packers. I didn't know we had an owner here. So congratulations. Tell your wife and kids you won an award. Okay. Here's our story for today. A man's in the shower just as his wife is finishing getting dressed when the doorbell rings. The wife puts down her makeup and runs downstairs. When she opens the door, there stands Bob, the next door neighbor. Before she says a word, Bob says, I'll give you $800 to kiss me. The woman is surprised, shocked even, but after thinking for just a moment, she pulls Bob close to him and kisses him. After a few seconds, Bob hands her $800 in cash and leaves. The woman puts the cash in her purse and goes back upstairs to finish her makeup. When she gets to the bathroom, her husband says, who was that? She says, it was Bob, the next door neighbor. He says, great. Did he say anything about the $800 he owes me? You have to keep thinking about that one. That one gets funnier as you think about it. Okay. Because the reason it gets funnier is, no. Okay, this week is session 19. Hard to believe, it's week 19, calling it the Power of a Sack Lunch. And we're going to watch a clip from what's really a very, very good movie. I forget when it came out, but it's called The Green Mile. Takes place in a prison. It's a story of Tom Hanks plays the role of a prison guard. Michael Clark Duncan, the late Michael Clark Duncan, plays the role of a wrongly convicted inmate named John Coffey. It's interesting because that's my last name, and he describes it the same way I always have. He says, just like what you drink, only spelled different. And that's what I've said for years. And this inmate he's convicted of a horrible crime, but he's wrongly convicted. But he has this unusual ability to feel other people's pain, to see good and evil in people, and even to heal. He's kind of a Christ figure in this movie. It's kind of fascinating. But in the scene I'm going to show you, Hank's character wants to thank John for helping him out, for healing him in some miraculous way of kind of a urinary infection he had that was very painful. One of the great movie scenes of all time is the first time he goes to the bathroom after he's healed, and he's expecting pain, and he doesn't have pain, and the look on his face, if you haven't seen that scene, Hank should have got an Academy Award just for that scene. So he's very grateful, and he wants to thank John, and he brings some homemade cornbread that his wife has made to give to this inmate. So watch this scene.
John? Smelling me some cornbread.
It's from my missus. She wanted to thank you.
Thank me for what?
Well, you know.
For helping me. Helping you with what?
You know.
Oh. Was your missus pleased?
Several times.
Oh, John, I smell that from over here. I surely can.
Can I give Dale Mr. Jacobson?
It's yours, John. You can do with it as you please.
Here, this for Dale and Mr. Jacob.
Hey, what about me? I'm gonna get some too, ain't I?
It's yours, John. As you please.
I think I'll just keep the rest in.
Courtesy of the gentleman across the way.
Oh, John, that's so very fine of you. I thank you. Mr. Jingle, thank you. My mama will thank you too, but she's dead.
Welcome.
I thought of that scene because the story we're going to look at involves a sharing of a little bit of food that someone has. So we're going to look at one of the most well-known stories in the New Testament. The version of it we're going to read is in Matthew chapter 14. So let me read the story to you. I'm going to pick it up from a couple places, explain some things, then we'll get into it and talk about it. Matthew 14, when Jesus heard what had happened, I'm going to pause there because we have to know what he had heard. So what's happening? What's the situation here? Now, what had happened is one of the saddest and most unsavory stories in the entire New Testament. It has to do with the execution of John the Baptist. John the Baptist, as you may or may not know, was Jesus' cousin because he's the son of a woman named Elizabeth who was Mary, Jesus' mother's cousin. So he's related Jesus is related to John the Baptist. King Herod, who was the corrupt ruler of that region of Israel, had been having an affair with his own brother's wife, a woman named Herodias. And John the Baptist, who was an itinerant preacher, sort of a prophet, had called him out publicly for this great sin. And Herod didn't like that very much, and he wanted to kill John the Baptist, but he couldn't because of how popular John the Baptist was among the people. They regarded him as a man of God who was a prophet, and so he knew he couldn't do that just for the public relations aspect of it. But then came his birthday, and Herod throws himself this huge, opulent birthday party, and the daughter of Herodias, the woman he's having the affair with, her daughter does this dance for him. And the dance was probably some sort of exotic or erotic dance. Herod is so pleased and excited by her dance that he promises to give her anything she asks for. And what she asked for at her mother's prompting, who's angry at John the Baptist, is she asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter. And so that's what Herod does. He executes John the Baptist and serves up his head on a platter. So that's the news that Jesus has just heard, that his cousin was executed in this way for that purpose by that man. Then it says, after hearing this, he withdrew on a boat privately to a solitary place. I'll come back to that phrase, solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed on shore again and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. Now, jumping over to John's gospel, he includes a little detail about where they got the fish and the bread. John says, another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? Back to Matthew, verse 18. Bring them here to me, he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. And they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Okay, there are only 2 miracle stories in the New Testament that appear in all 4 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, they all tell the same story of Jesus, but they tell it using different stories. But there's 2 stories that appear 4 times in all 4 Gospels. One is the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, for obvious reasons. The other one is this story, the feeding of the 5,000. The first thing I'm going to pull out of it and we see in it is the compassion of Jesus. The compassion of Jesus. My brother Joe, as I've mentioned before, is a pastor in Ohio. And he tells a story of a few years ago. A woman came up right as he finished the service, and one woman came up to talk to him after the sermon. And this happens. Anybody who's a pastor knows this happens. We invite people to do it. But I think it was, he has a large church, multiple campuses, and it was like his 3rd or 4th sermon of the weekend. It had been a long week. I think it was a week in which he had dealt with some really difficult things, like I think he did the funeral of a young man who took his own life. And so he's just kind of spent emotionally, physically, spiritually. But this lady came up, and it was after the last service of the day, and so she was very weepy and teary looking. He figured something big's going on in her life, so he was going to take time and do his best to listen to her and help her and pray with her. And what she said was, when she came to him, was, Pastor Joe, she talked about they had to put down their pet dog. I think it was a corgi or something that week, which was sad, and my brother's nodding. And then she asked him, through tears, will Puffy, or whatever the dog's name was, will Puffy be in heaven? Now, if you know anything about my brother, you know this probably wasn't the best time for her to ask that kind of question. He knew he should try to be compassionate. He could see the pain on her face. He knew about her loss. But he's tired, and the question seemed so trivial compared to what he had been dealing with that before he knew it, he said, Susan, your corgi's not going to be in heaven. Jesus didn't die on the cross for your dog's sins. And he said the moment it went out of his mouth, he could see that it probably wasn't the right way to say that. What he said was true, technically speaking, but the manner in which he delivered it lacked just a bit of compassion. I think that lady hated him for like years after that. But Jesus has just received personal, devastating news. His own cousin, relative, the one who baptized him in the Jordan River, has just been summarily executed by an evil, egomaniac king named Herod. So Matthew says Jesus withdraws to a solitary place to be alone and to pray. Now, a couple of things here. First, when you read the gospel accounts, Jesus, this was sort of his practice. He did this often. And his public life and ministry was so busy, filled with so many crowds, he often would withdraw to pray. It's kind of how he recharged his spiritual batteries. He would do it. Sometimes he'd pray all night, but he would withdraw. Secondly, this phrase, solitary place, is the Greek phrase eremon topon, which many scholars believe is referring to a specific place that's still there today. It's called Eremos Cave, and it's just up from the Sea of Galilee. Now, I had a chance to visit this place a couple years ago when Jeff and his wife, myself and my wife, went to the Holy Land, and we saw this place. It's called Eremos Cave, and you can translate that solitary place or lonely place. Many scholars believe that this is the place where Jesus would often go. And it makes some sense because when you go there, and we actually went and sat inside this cave, when you're inside it and you're looking out, this is the view. And so you can see it's like a perfect place. You're hidden, you're alone, no one can see you, you're in this little cave, and you're looking out at that. You can see this. It would make sense if this is the place. So imagine Jesus, he gets in a boat, he leaves the town where he's been teaching and stuff, and when he hears this news, goes across just a little bit of the lake, goes here to be by himself, to deal with this thing that's happened, to pray, to grieve. But people don't leave him alone. They chase him down. They know about this place. They know where he likely went because it was his habit. So the people chase him down. They eventually get there. And right about there, I find myself saying, wouldn't you kind of want to say, your dog's not going to be in heaven? Or something like, leave me alone. Don't you people have a life? Just give me one night. But he doesn't do that. Matthew just says, almost without comment, he had compassion on them. Now, the word compassion here is an interesting word. It means to be moved in the inward parts, to feel something deeply in your gut. And I think at this little point in the story, we see a couple of things. First, we see that if we put ourselves in the position of the people flocking to him, chasing him down, not giving him any space, we see that we can always go to Jesus. That he doesn't get tired of us. He doesn't get tired of our problems. He doesn't get tired of our pains. Nothing is too trivial that we can't bring it to him. He's always ready to listen, ready to help. That's a pretty amazing thing. That's called grace. But the second thing we see is that Jesus then becomes our model for compassion. That's because people mattered to him. It's a pretty simple way to say it. People mattered to him, and people should matter to us. So that's the first thing we see. And the second thing we see is the problem of the disciples. So here's the scene. Huge crowd of people. And we find out that at the end of Matthew's story, he waits to the end to give us the numbers. He says the number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So 5,000 men, not counting women and children. So let's just say if each man has either a wife or a child with him, that puts the number to 10,000. If each man has a wife and a child, that puts it at 15,000. So we don't really know exactly how many, but this is a big crowd of people. Maybe it's enough to fill the Kane County Baseball Stadium. Maybe it's enough to fill half the United Center. Maybe it's enough to fill United. This is a big group of people. This is a small village. And we see in verse 15, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. And it's Andrew, Peter's brother, as I read before. He makes kind of a Captain Obvious statement. He says, but how far will they go among so many? I mean, we have a couple of fish sandwiches and 15,000 people. Duh, right? Another disciple named Philip says, in a different gospel, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a single bite. So here's the problem. Large crowd, late in the day. We can assume everyone is tired, including the disciples, right? Because they've been with Jesus this whole time. no food, actually a tiny bit of food. We're going to get to that in just a minute. And the obvious thing to do is tell everyone to go home. Show's over for today. Go home, get your meal, come back tomorrow. And it may be that the disciples are just tired and hungry and don't want to deal with people anymore, like my brother that day, or like I feel sometimes, like you feel sometimes. Or it's also possible that they aren't just being hard-hearted or selfish or lazy. Maybe they're just being really reasonable. It makes sense, right? Makes sense. But Jesus says, no, they don't have to go away. You give them something to eat. Now, why would he say this? This is really kind of a crazy thing to say. Disciples had no food. They have little or no money. There's not a Portillo's or McDonald's just down the street. They can't go over there and say, we'd like 15,000 Happy Meals to go, please. How are they going to do it? Here's what I think. I think he's challenging them to see differently. I think he's challenging his disciples, who he loves, to see differently. I think he's challenging their compassion. He's saying these people matter. They matter to me, and they should matter to you. And then I think he's challenging their faith. Because what's our first reaction to situations of overwhelming need? It's just like the disciples, right? There's not enough. We don't have enough. There's no way to do this. The problem's too big. What can we actually really do about it? I made a trip to, I've talked about it this year, I think. I made a trip to Africa last summer to visit some of our Chapel Street ministry partners in that part of the world. Had a chance to be in Tanzania, Zanzibar, Rwanda, and Uganda. And on more than one occasion, I remember just looking, like being in a city in Uganda and noticing, you just can't help it. There's just little children everywhere, just kids everywhere. And every woman you see that's under 40 years old is expecting another baby. And you feel that the need is just overwhelming for stuff like water. It's overwhelming, and you just feel overwhelmed by it. But I learned two things, again, which I do when I travel. Anybody would learn when they travel around the world to see ministry partners like that. I saw a need that is absolutely overwhelming, and you want to just say, it's too big. What can we even, it's like a drop in the bucket, drop in the ocean. On the other hand, I see God doing amazing things through some amazing people that you'll never, ever, ever hear about until heaven, maybe. And they're doing it one little drop at a time. So there's overwhelming need, but you see these things happening, and they're happening one drop or one person at a time. And that leads to the third thing we see in the story, and that's the gift of faith. Back to John's Gospel, chapter 6. Another one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Let's stop here. Now, we know the story, right? We've heard the story since Sunday school. We've heard the story. And because we know the end of the story, because we know it's a miracle story, we kind of want to jump over all the rest of it and just get to that part. Whoa, it's a miracle. But think about it. Okay, here's a young boy with what amounts to a sack lunch, okay? My guess is, and we don't know, I'm just guessing. If I was writing this into a novel, I'm guessing that maybe his mom put that together for him before he left that day. Because if it was a boy putting it together, there'd be some Skittles and Ding Dongs and stuff in there, right? This is just 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. That's a mom lunch. So I think mom put it together for him. He goes, Mom, I'm going down to the lake for the day. When are you going to be home? I'm not sure. Just going down there, meet some friends. Well, you need to take some food with you. Here's some bread and fish. You be careful. I'll be fine. Take the food. Yeesh, Mom, okay. Takes the food. Then he sees a crowd, and he decides to go check it out. And he ends up watching Jesus, listening to Jesus, hanging out with friends maybe, all day. He sees some amazing things. And then just as it's getting dinner time, he's getting hungry, but he's got his lunch there with him in his sack or something. And a man he doesn't know, a stranger, comes up to him. It happens to be Andrew. And he's walking through the crowd saying, anybody got food? Anybody bring any food? He's looking for food. Now, put yourself in the boy's place. You have some food because either your mom thought about it or you thought about it. You have some food. There's a whole crowd of people, and most of them haven't brought anything with them. And you're prepared, but they're not. So what do you do? If you offer up your food, what's it going to do? Look how many people there are. What are you going to do? Our first instinct, I think, is to just keep our mouth shut, right? Maybe keep the sack lunch somewhere and then sneak off somewhere behind a tree and just wolf it down so nobody sees, because you have yours. I mean, it's not my problem they didn't come prepared, right? I've actually been on mission trips in the past, mission trips of adults where people have hoarded food because they're not sure when they're going to have the next, so they'll hoard like candy bars and stuff and make sure, I've seen that happen because we get nervous about food, right? But this boy, whose name we don't know, offers his sack lunch to Andrew because Andrew takes it back to Jesus. The boy just gives it up, offers it. Now we know what happened next. It says, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Now, what does that remind you of? It should remind you of something. Jesus holding bread, blessing it, and breaking it. It's exactly the language used at the Last Supper when he initiated what we now call communion. It's the words we use when we share communion together. Jesus took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. The disciples picked up 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. So Jesus multiplies in some way the 5 barley loaves and the 2 fish, enough to feed the whole crowd with 12 baskets left over. Now, a couple of questions here. Why does Jesus do it this way? Assuming that this is a miracle. I mean, that's what it says. It's in all 4 Gospels, and they all tell the story because it was so amazing. Why does he do it this way? Why not, for example, just eliminate the crowd's hunger? Right? Why not do it that way? I mean, he healed the leper by touching him, making him clean, just had to touch him. He healed the paralyzed man by speaking to him. Couldn't he just fill their bellies with a wave of the arm? Take away all the hunger. He doesn't. Why doesn't he call down bread and fruit from the sky? You know, in the Old Testament, God provided manna every morning for his people out in the desert. Jesus turned water into wine from a distance. Why can't he turn like raindrops into bananas? Right? Why not do it easier? Why involve the disciples at all? Why involve this boy's sack lunch at all? Here's the point, I think. Jesus invites our participation. He doesn't need it because he's God with all the power and all the ability, but he invites our participation. Something was important to him about inviting his disciples into the process, about allowing this boy to contribute to the process. Jesus uses his disciples, and that's us, to carry out his compassion in the world. It was important to him. Jesus, secondly, multiplies our generosity. When we offer what we have, our resources, meager as they may be, our time, our talents, when we offer what we have, God has a way of multiplying what we give into something far greater than we could scarcely imagine. And we see that pattern throughout the New Testament. So Jesus invites our participation, he multiplies our generosity, and then he multiplies our faith. He increases our faith. Imagine, again, we don't know, but imagine that boy goes home that night. Mom says, "Hey, honey, how'd your day go?" You won't believe what Jesus did. What? Imagine. He took remember the lunch you made? And imagine the rest of that boy's life, the story he told. Imagine the influence that boy's life had on others. We don't know. I'd love to write a story about it someday. Let me tell you what happened once. This is why I believe. Let me tell you what he did with my gift. Let me tell you what he can do with yours. And one last little detail. The 12 baskets left over. All 4 stories talk about the 12 baskets left over. It's interesting. Interesting to me. What's that saying? I think it's saying the problems we see around us are enormous and overwhelming. Sometimes the problems we see inside ourselves are enormous and overwhelming. But when we offer what we have, when we offer it up, and Jesus gets involved, there's always more than enough. There's more than enough. Here's what the questions I want you to talk about around the table. I'm going to add one again today. First, is your first reaction to human need or human suffering compassion or some version of avoidance? Just your first instinct when you see overwhelming need. Compassion or avoidance or some combination. Secondly, do you tend to identify more with the disciples' reaction to the problem or with the young boy's reaction to the problem? Send them home. It's the smartest thing to do. Here's what I have. Okay. Thirdly, this is one I want to add to it. What's your equivalent of a sack lunch? What's your equivalent to that little sack lunch that you can offer? All right, get your coffee, get a donut. I'll wrap you up at your usual time.